and thank you very much for having me here talking to you today. My name's McArthur, and after 2.5 years I have just completed my stint on London 2012, hence the bags and the wrinkles. I'm very much hoping that the camera's going to be kind to me today, but I'm not sure it can be. So do bear with me. This is the first time I've spoken about the games, post-games, and I'm just trying to remember what it was I actually did because I've had a week's holiday. I was Business Stakeholder Engagement Manager for about 2 years on the London 2012 Games. What did this mean? It meant that I was responsible for getting to as many businesses as possible across London with the message that their travel would be affected if they did not do something to change it during the Games. So TDM, Travel Demand Management, had a number of parts that made it up, but Travel Advice for Business was the one that I personally was involved with. What was Travel Demand Management? It was all about how we could ensure that the number of trips that would be generated by the Games happening in London could be accommodated on the public transport system and the road network. We really took this from an angle of saying, this is not me telling you what to do, but this is in your own interest to do this. It was the outreach part to businesses across London to help them understand, firstly, what the impact would be. Secondly, what the solutions to that would be, you know, the impact. And then what could they do to then get around all of this? And that's where the Travel Advice for Business campaign was there. It was to help businesses understand and get through it. So as I said, my role was to look at business stakeholder engagement. To do this, I really needed to set out the challenge to businesses, and I needed to make sure that the approach to get to businesses was as effective as possible. So what we used was the mantra of going to few to reach many. What we saw was there was a lot of transferable lessons from what was done on London 2012 in TDM, and what could be taken from that and translated to businesses without the big stick of the Olympics behind it. 500 organisations who had a threshold of staff who were really going to be in affected areas were given one-to-one help. And essentially it helped them create their action plan based on the company issues that the company might face and the situation that they were in. It was offered to companies with a certain threshold of staff, so bigger companies in hotspot areas, in areas of focus. We then ran things like workshops. Workshops were a kind of a 1 to 20 ratio, so we would have 20 businesses in a room, one person there, expressing what the impact would be, and then working through what their action plan needed to look like. As well as that, there were the use of business intermediaries, and that's really where I had most input. Business intermediaries is just a technical term for saying people who represent business. So CBI, London First, we use Canary Wharf Group, Heart of London Business Alliance, New West End Company, anyone who represented business and had a voice in that business community. We worked with them as our ambassadors, basically. They were like an army of people behind us, helping us to get this message out about that the Games would affect travel during the period of the Olympics and the Paralympic Games. At the end of the campaign, I think there was about 70 intermediaries involved, but there was always a top sort of priority 10 or 40 so that we knew who to go to get that loudest message out. We worked out that we had 275,000 VAT registered businesses in London. Business intermediaries, this group of 70, covered about 200,000 of those businesses. The mantra of going to few to reach many was really, really associated with that model. So it was one person talking to 70, talking to 200,000. It was a real amplification that went on. Travel Demand Management was not just about travel advice for business. There was a whole marketing and communications campaign. There was a travel information services as well. I'm going to concentrate on travel advice for business today. What was the challenge? I've talked about hotspots, areas of focus, but how did we know where was going to be busy, when, for how long during the Games? Some very clever people sat down and predicted where was going to be busiest, when, for how long, on what days. They used masses of different data to actually to create these models. And what we did was then took that, translated it, and worked out how as a business we could, or how businesses would be affected by that. So we had what we called hotspots, and they were at different times as well. We also knew that different lines would be used more heavily than others, and we also knew, because of the Olympic route network, Paralympic route network, alternative Olympic route network, and road events Olympic route network, and we had an understanding of where would be busiest and when on the road networks too. So we had this 30% average reduction that we needed to achieve, but actually on some days, on some lines, mostly the Jubilee line, and onto some competition venues, what we actually realised it was a much higher than 30% reduction that was needed. So the campaign was very, very flexible, but very much targeted on what we called hotspots or areas of focus. An example of which would be Canary Wharf, the West End, around embankments. And these were the areas that we knew would be facing most significant pressure. The solutions that we looked at were simple and straightforward. Basically 4 R's: reduce, retime, remode, reroute. Remode is just walking and cycling basically. So the message we needed to get out to businesses was, this is how big it's going to be. This is how and when you're going to be impacted, but this is what you can do to actually get around that. And that's what those 4 R's were. And what we asked organisations to do was to say, what do you think you could do? Could you work from home? Will people be taking annual leave? Will people be maybe working a compressed working week and take that Friday and the Monday off, which again fits in with that reduced message? And then we had retime. So we could say that actually it's going to get really, really busy in London Bridge at about 7:30 onwards. Is there the possibility that staff or deliveries, could that start a bit earlier? Could they leave a bit earlier? Start later, finish later? And then we had reroute, and we used loads and loads of different pieces of collateral to help people. We had maps, we had handbooks, we had grids that showed the demand forecast, you know, how busy things were going to be at what time, and remode. So walking and cycling was a massive opportunity to push. We did ask people to try to consider to put everything into these 4 categories. Did it work? I'm standing here with a smile on my face because it is an absolute joy to be here to say it was a success. Obviously I was only a tiny cog in that wheel. There was lots and lots and lots and lots of other people making it happen, but the first results that have come back that we've caught sight of have said 1/3 of Londoners changed how they travelled during the games. I mean, in some ways it was a bit too successful because the headlines in the Metro and the Evening Standard was London is a ghost town and no one's coming to the West End. In terms of other results that are coming back from that, Terry was very keen that I spoke to you today about what businesses actually did. What did they take of those 4 R's? What did they choose to do? So remember, it's reduce, retime, reroute, remode. And then I thought that maybe reduce would have been the thing that they took away with the most, but actually retime was what most of the organisations did. Now there's case studies and surveys going on currently with people who we were involved with at the businesses. The results from that haven't come back yet, but anecdotally retime was the message that people took on board. Now why not reduce? There is still seeming to be some scepticism about the whole work from home. Senior management were very, in some cases, very reticent to send that out as the message about what they wanted people to do. Not all businesses, but some. So retime became the real message that people took away with them. I worked from Canary Wharf during the games, and what I saw was the gate pattern, the number of people coming in, really transferred itself an hour earlier. So the peak travel commute became like 6:30 to 7:38 rather than 8 to 9. And then again on the roads as well, what we saw were the queues coming into London starting about 6:30 rather than that sort of 8 o'clock. So people listened and shifted forward. And I think that will be something in terms of legacy and moving forward that we'll want to keep happening. I think I'll probably finish by saying, from my perspective, having worked in travel behaviour change for probably about 12 years now, the games were hard on me, obviously I'm only 20. I really never said the word travel plan. I never said, you know, climate change. I didn't really use anything other than their own interests. I made sure that when I spoke to people, it was about them. It was about how they could get around it, and it wasn't preachy, and it wasn't, you know, telling them to do anything. It was just advising them about what might happen if they didn't. And you know, you do go through a whole cycle with people where they're just angry, and then they're scared, and then they need to know everything, and then they come with you, and then at the end of it, one of the best results from this is we've had so many emails and things from people just saying we're so grateful for the time you spent with us. We had top-down approach in terms of, going to the business intermediaries and the businesses. That was sort of one approach, but then also the marketing and communications activity was posters, press, advertising, Twitter, all of the different social media, and that was everywhere. That was all encompassing, and so that you could say that that was kind of bottom up. So there's a lot more that I could say about this, but I'm sure you actually want to get home after today. So thank you very much for listening to me today. As I said, it's been a pleasure to talk about this to you. I hope you've at least found some of it interesting, and I hope you've had a great day. Thank you.